Go to any coastline and look closely at the shape of the land. You'll notice that many of them have a slight curve, a gentle slope where the land seems to melt away into the sea. But this wasn't always the case. During the last ice age, which ended around 11,700 years ago, much of the world was covered in thick sheets of ice. All that frozen water locked away so much of Earth's available water that sea levels were nearly 400 feet or 125 meters lower than they are today. This meant that many coastal areas were significantly further from the ocean. In some places, the coastlines jutted out into the sea, forming what geologists call an estuary, a wide, often shallow body of water partially cut off from the ocean and full of fresh river water. Estuaries can be great places for plants and animals to thrive because they rehome to a mix of salt and fresh water. They also tend to be rich in nutrients and minerals carried by rivers from inland. So it's no surprise that many early human societies built settlements near estuaries. But with the end of the Ice Age came a rapid rise in sea levels, which drowned many of these prehistoric villages and left them lost beneath the waves. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk about when sea levels rose and how prehistoric coastal villages were swallowed whole. The end of the Ice Age was a wild time, as the climate warmed, glaciers melted, and the extra water flowed into the oceans, causing the sea level to rise about 360 feet or 100 meters in just a few centuries. It happened so quickly that if you tried to run from one side of an estuary to the other, you would have outrun a tsunami. But this sudden flooding wasn't a tsunami. Instead, it was a slow but steady rise of the entire sea level. And while tsunamis can cause huge swaths of coastal land to disappear in a matter of hours, the flooding at the end of the Ice Age was a more subtle, drawn-out process that occurred over many generations. For the people who lived near the coast, though, the consequences were just as disastrous. Rising sea levels can have all sorts of effects on a coastline. As the ocean steadily encroaches on the land, it erodes the beach, causing cliffs to crumble and beaches to shrink. Over time, rising seas can completely reshape a coastline. And while this happens slowly on human timescales, it can occur rapidly on geologic timescales. The weight of the rising water eventually causes the land to buckle and sink. Some rocks are more resistant to erosion than others, so they form headlands that stick out into the sea. Meanwhile, weaker rock types that weather more quickly form bays. These features can then become focal points for wave energy, concentrating erosion in these areas and speeding up the reshaping of the coastline. And while these processes do change the shape of the land, they also have the potential to completely submerge it. In fact, scientists think that many coastal areas were completely underwater long before the melting of the ice caps at the end of the Ice Age. For example, in the Doggerland region of northwestern Europe, which is now mostly submerged, the sea level had already risen by about 65 feet or 20 meters by 14,500 years ago. That means that by the time the ice sheets melted and the sea level rose another 300 feet, much of Doggerland was already under the waves. Unfortunately for the humans living there, the process didn't stop. One of the most well-known examples of an inundated prehistoric landscape is the Black Sea. During the Ice Age, the Black Sea extended far beyond its current boundaries. In fact, it didn't even look like a sea at all. Instead, it was a large, shallow lake located far from the ocean. But around 8000 BCE, the rising sea level flooded this lake, turning it into the Black Sea we know today. Scientists have estimated that the sea level rose by about 390 feet or 120 meters between 14,000 and 7000 BC, inundating much of the coastal areas around the Black Sea. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of human activity in the area, suggesting that many people lived along the shores of the prehistoric lake. But they had to abandon their homes when the waters rose. To make matters worse, as the sea level rose, the currents shifted, bringing cold salt water from the Atlantic Ocean into the Black Sea. The water temperature dropped by about 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees Celsius, killing off most of the native species and turning the Black Sea into an oxygen-poor, salty desert. Any humans who had survived the initial flooding probably didn't stick around. As the Black Sea flooded, the people living in the region probably headed inland, which is how the Kurgan culture emerged. The Kurgans settled in the fertile lands north of the Caucasus Mountains, where they built large, round dwellings made of wood and stone. They kept livestock, grew crops, and lived in small communities. However, researchers think that the rising sea level may have indirectly led to their downfall. As the Kurgans moved inland, they brought their domesticated animals with them. Fortunately, those animals soon found themselves in a land full of new predators, such as wolves and bears. Faced with constant danger, the Kuranis began building larger and sturdier houses to protect themselves. Eventually, they took their architectural ingenuity to the next level and started constructing burial mounds called kurgans, which are still found throughout the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Meanwhile, other people were heading in the opposite direction when the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and North America, disappeared beneath the waves around 13,500 years ago. The people living in Siberia likely chose to head east. Over the next 1,500 years, they spread across the Pacific coast. Following the marine ice sheet that acted as a highway through the Bering Sea, these people were among the first to master the art of fishing, which provided them with a nearly limitless source of food. But rising sea levels may have also been responsible for their downfall. Around 4,000 years ago, the Jomon people of Japan developed the world's oldest known fishing boats, which allowed them to travel farther offshore and catch bigger fish. But the rising sea level may have played a role in their demise. As the sea level rose, the waves eroded the beaches, making it harder for the boats to come ashore. Without access to the forest for materials, the Jomon people may have been forced to abandon their boats, which may have contributed to the end of their culture. On a smaller scale, rising sea levels have also affected more recent settlements. Between 1993 and 2009, the island of Tuvalu saw an average annual loss of 5 acres of land due to rising sea levels. At the same time, the country's population was growing, meaning that, in the near future, there may not be enough land for everyone. Because of this, the government has already purchased land on the island of Fiji for its citizens. By the end of the century, all of Tuvalu's islands could be underwater, forcing its citizens to flee. And while Tuvalu will likely be completely underwater in the next few centuries, other areas such as New York City and London could be partially submerged by the year 2100 as sea levels continue to rise. Coastal cities will be at risk of flooding, storm surges, and erosion. If we don't take action to reduce our carbon footprint, sea levels could rise by as much as 6 feet by 2100. Humans are incredibly resilient and inventive creatures, and I have no doubt that we will find a way to adapt to the changing coastline. But there are many cultures whose stories ended when sea levels rose, their achievements were lost beneath the waves, and their legacy was never passed down. We'll never know how many brilliant minds or creative spirits were extinguished when the waters rose, which is why it's so important to learn about the history of rising sea levels. Not only does it help us understand the past, but it also gives us insight into the challenges we may face in the future. So the next time you're at the coast, take a moment to appreciate the gentle curve of the land. Remember that it wasn't always this way. In the not-so-distant past, the land may have looked completely different, and who knows, maybe one day it will once again change shape as the sea level rises and the coast is reshaped. Thank you for watching. Hope you learned something new. See you later.